It's been 4 weeks since we were here in Second Kings, but uh, really this chapter kind of breaks in half in such a point where we're not really picking up part two of the story. So I think it'll be fine here. So Second Kings chapter 8, starting in verse 16, it says, "And in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being then king of Judah, Jehoram the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David his servant's sake, as he promised him to give him always a light, and to his children. And in his days Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah, and made a king over themselves. And so Joram went over to Zair, and all the chariots with him, and he rose by night, and he smote the Edomites which compassed him about, and the captains of the chariots, and the people fled into their tents. And yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah unto this day. And then Libnah revolted at the same time." And then it says, "And all the rest of the acts of Joram and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Joram slept with his fathers, and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Ahaziah his son reigned in his stead. And in the 12th year of Jehoram the son of Ahab king of Israel did Ahaziah the son of Jehoram king of Judah begin to reign. 22 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri king of Israel. And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab, and did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And he went with Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Syria, and Ramoth Gilead. And the Syrians wounded Joram. And King Joram went back to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him at Ramah. And when he fought against Hazael, the king of Syria, and Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was sick." Now, here we do kind of stop in the middle of a story, which we'll pick up again in chapter 9. But here in verse 16, for the first time in several chapters, the author of Kings is now switching back from speaking of things that were taking place in the northern kingdom, and now he switches back to speaking of Judah. And so this is our first look at Judah in a while. Now, one thing just kind of quickly you have to kind of keep in line is that there was a time here where there were kings in Israel and kings in Judah with the same name. And so Ahab had two sons, Ahaziah and Jehoram. Both of them became king. Ahaziah first, and then Jehoram. In the south, in Judah, you had King Jehoshaphat, who had a son named Jehoram, who became king. And then he had a son named Ahaziah, who became king. And so right around the same time, you have, now it's reversed. In Israel, you had Ahaziah and then Jehoram. In Judah, you had Jehoram and then Ahaziah. But you have to really kind of try and keep things where they're supposed to be, or it's easy to get kind of confused. Now here, just as a note, they reference in verse 16 that his name is Jehoram, and then for the rest of the time, they call him Joram. Okay, and so that's just kind of an alternate way to say his name, unlike, William and Bill, that kind of thing, So it's Joram is how it's written most of the time, but his name is Jehoram. And so Joram here, unfortunately, does not follow in his father's footsteps. His father is Jehoshaphat, and we read of Jehoshaphat back in 1 Kings chapter 22. It says that he walked in all the ways of Asa his father. He turned not aside from it, doing that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. And so Jehoshaphat wasn't a perfect man. You can go read there 1 Kings 22. He had his own issues. But the overall vision of his life was one that he walked with the Lord, as did his father Asa. And here Joram breaks from that tradition. And as I've said from the beginning, Judah it kind of went back and forth. Sometimes they had good godly kings. Sometimes they had evil wicked kings. In Israel, they never had a good king. After Solomon, it was all bad. And so in the south, you kind of wavered up and down. Well, here we're having one of those down moments, one of the down kings. And so instead of following in the footsteps of Jehoshaphat, it says of Jehoram that he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Ahab. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. One thing you're going to notice, that the theme of this section of chapter 8 here is the theme of influence. And we're going to see this in both of these kings. And so the daughter of Ahab, now one of the worst things Jehoshaphat ever did And again, you can go read 1 Kings 22, where it kind of gives his biography a little bit. Again, not a perfect man, but the worst thing he ever did by far was marry off his son to the daughter of Ahab. Now, there were all kinds of reasons politically why people did that kind of thing at the time. And obviously, if you were Israel and Judah, there were significant reasons why you wanted close political ties. If for no other reason, then these are literally our relatives, right? But, you wanted to have geographically, obviously, they're right there by one another. Judah has the temple, and so they would want to have close relational ties with Israel to give people options. There's many reasons why he might have done it, but it doesn't excuse the fact that he married off his son to the daughter of the worst king that Israel ever had. And that had profound impact. And as we'll see in our text, it had profound negative impact. She is a product of Jezebel and Ahab. And you can't just expect someone who is a product of that, unless they have a dramatic turning away from that kind of lifestyle, they're going to follow in those footsteps. That's how things go. And so there's Jehoshaphat marries off his son Jehoram. He marries, we find out later her name is Athaliah. He marries Athaliah, and that influence follows him during his reign. However, we get this one small note. It says in verse 19, it says, "Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David his servant's sake, as he promised him to give away all Eliad to his children." And so one thing that's kind of said implicitly there in verse 19, again, Asa was a good king. Jehoshaphat was a good king. And then all of a sudden here comes Jehoram. And Jehoram was so bad that the author has to tell us that God still would remain faithful and would not destroy Judah. And so, spiritually speaking, Jehoram was such a bad, a negative king for the nation that it got to the point where the author had to tell us, now things were bad enough where this could have happened, but God would be faithful, and thus he didn't destroy Judah, right? You wouldn't have to have written that had the nation been spiritually in tune with God and didn't need to be destroyed. He wrote that because they needed to be destroyed, and yet God would remain faithful to his covenant with David. And so what we have then in Joram, and we'll see here in a second with Ahaziah as well, is a perfect example of the importance of the relationships that we choose. And the Bible says a lot about this. Undoubtedly, Joram's father was a godly influence. We've already talked about that. We said earlier, 1 Kings 22:43, that the kind of the theme of Joseph's life was that he did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. That was the overall description of Jehoshaphat's life. So undoubtedly, Jehoshaphat was a godly man, a godly influence upon him, but he chose to follow the influence of his wife. He chose to go in the way of Ahab and Ahab's house. Paul told the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 6, "Be you not unequally yoked together with unbelievers? For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness?" Now, he's not talking specifically about marriage, but obviously marriage would be the ultimate fulfillment of what Paul is talking about here. For no other reason then, outside of Christ, in particular for the believer, outside of Christ, there is not another relationship in your life that will have more influence upon you than the person you choose to marry. And so we have to be very careful about these kinds of things. And Jehoram here is a perfect example. And maybe he said, well, Athaliah is not Ahab. Athaliah is not Jezebel. Maybe she's fine. But he didn't pay attention, or I guess I could say Jehoshaphat didn't pay attention. He's the one who really did it. But nevertheless, they didn't pay attention enough to the influence of them on Athaliah and think about the implications of when she inevitably starts to influence her husband. I mean, we don't have to look any further than her mother. Look at how her mother influenced Ahab. I won't rehash all that. We saw that as we went through the latter end of 1 Kings, beginning of 2 Kings. Jezebel was such a wicked woman, and at the same time, such an influence upon Ahab. And so the same thing is happening here with her daughter. And so Joram falls prey to this. And so many people do. Joram falls prey to this. And again, the intent of the author of Kings, as I've said this so many times before, is to kind of have his thumbprint on the spiritual pulse of the nation. That's what he's concerned with. He's not concerned with all the ins and outs of every little detail and decision that the kings make. What he's mainly concerned with is how is the country spiritually? And so here you have this relationship with Joram and Athaliah, and things are so bad, he has to say, but God said he won't destroy Judah because of his covenant with David. And so Joram then learned, when you marry somebody, you don't just get them, you get their family. Now, that's not, I wouldn't say it's true 100% of the time, but I would say that's true most of the time. When you marry somebody, you don't just get them, you get their family. And so here, he didn't just get Athaliah, he got Ahab as well. And that was the problem. He got Jezebel as well. I guess I should say that as well. I like what J. Vernon McGee said. He said, when you marry a child of the devil, your father-in-law sees to it that you get trouble. Right? And this is exactly what's happening here. And the influence of Ahab and Jezebel now is moving south into to pervade the nation of Judah. Now here we see kind of immediately the trouble came in the form of revolt. And so just to kind of quickly show this, both we see the nation of Edom in verse 21 and in verse 22, the city of Libnah, both of these places that were under Jehoshaphat, if nothing else, subdued. Even if Israel didn't, or Judah rather, didn't directly control, they were not a threat under Jehoshaphat. He had subdued them. But now they saw, as under Joram, that this was the time to revolt. This was the time to rebel against that. And so verse 21, now I'll just read verse 21. It says, so Joram went over to Zair and all the chariots with him, and he rose by night, and he smote the Edomites which compassed him about, and the captains of the chariots, and the people fled into their tents. Verse 21 is difficult. The Hebrew and everything here is difficult. And so the best, I think, in my opinion, the best way to take verse 21 is that Joram, he's going out with his men, obviously to try and rein Edom back in. I mean, that's clear. That's evident. That's what's taking place. But the beginning of the verse tells them that they were compassed. But right about the middle, it says that the Edomites compassed him about. And so Joram is there with his men, his chariots, all his troops. And then at the end of the verse, it says, and the captains of the chariots and the people fled into their tents. So what seems to be the best way to take this is that as they're compassed about, Joram and his men have to fight all night long for just the chance to escape. Okay, so when it says there at the end of verse 21 that the people fled into the tents, the people are Judah. The people are not Edom. The people are Judah. Judah is fleeing. Judah lost this battle. And so this is, like I said, 21 is kind of a difficult verse, but that seems to be the best way to take it, that they fought and were not victorious, other than they broke through the line just enough for them to be able to escape and flee. And so verse 22, yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah unto this day. They were not able to rein them back in. And this was the immediate, and the author is really showing this, maybe not explicitly, but this is the assumption, is that the Edomites, and you could add the city of Libnah here, were revolting specifically because of the weakened state of Judah. And the reason that they were weakened is because, spiritually speaking, Joram was setting an example of ungodliness. And I think we could probably add adultery, not adultery, but idolatry and other things like that as well. And so because of they were spiritually weak, God was bringing upon them the curses that we read in the law. And because of those curses, they became politically weak. And as they became politically weak, they were vulnerable to these other nations, to these other cities. And so what is interesting is that the author here of Kings is setting up this revolt as a direct coincidence of the fact that Joram was not the man he was supposed to be. He was not the king that he was supposed to be. And so under Joram then, as opposed to under Jehoshaphat or under Asa or those who were in his line, Judah was now a weak nation. And like I said, this is one of the lower times, not the lowest, but one of the lower times in Judah's history. Now, that's all we're kind of told here. Let's go ahead and look just real quick. Go to 2 Chronicles 21, just a couple of verses there, because we're not given the end of Joram here. But we do read about it in 2 Chronicles 21. And I think it's just 2 or 3 verses over there. And so 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 18, I believe. Yes, so this is speaking of the same king. This is speaking of King Joram here. And it says, and after all this, the Lord smote him in his bowels with an incurable disease. And it came to pass that in the process of time, after the end of 2 years, here's what it says, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness, and so he died of sore diseases. And his people made no burning for him like the burning of his fathers. 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. And this says this, he departed without being desired. Howbeit they buried him in the city of David, but not in the sepulchres of the kings. So this is how bad he was. The people, after he died, they didn't give him a king's death. Now they buried him in Jerusalem, but not with the rest of the kings. This was this is a significant thing in this culture, right? What you did with the person after they had died, the way that you cared for the body, the way that you buried them, where you buried them, this all carried significant weight, culturally speaking. So the fact that they would do this showed what they thought about this man, and they thought very, very little about King Joram. And again, this is the author's intent to show us just how weak, spiritually speaking, this man was. Now, after he dies here at the end of chapter 8, we're introduced then to his son, Ahaziah. Now, as I said at the beginning, we have to keep our names straight here. And so interesting, like I mentioned, both Israel and Judah had a king Ahaziah, but the interesting thing is that both of these men only reigned for 1 year. So both the Ahaziah king of Israel and Judah both only ruled for a year. Now in Israel, Ahaziah was the son of Ahab. In Judah, Ahaziah was the grandson of Ahab through the marriage of Joram and Athaliah. Now both men made for poor kings. That's obvious. But again, just like with Jehoram, influence becomes the key. And without stating it just overtly, he makes it pretty clear. I think it's verse 26. Verse 27. Verse 27 says, and he walked in the way of the house of Ahab, and did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. Right? And so over and over and over here, the author is trying to show you, yeah, we're talking about Judah. We're not talking about Israel. But guess what? Judah has become the house of Ahab because of the influence of these marriages and how they have allowed this influence to pervade and to come in and to lead them astray. And as soon as they led them astray, what happened? Edom sees, oh, they're weak. Let's attack. Libnah sees, oh, they're weak. Let's revolt. And so these things are taking place, again, as a direct result of the weakened spiritual state of the nation. And so the chapter then ends with Jehoram and Ahaziah. And I'm not going to say much about this because we're going to see a lot more of detail about this in chapter 9. But there's another battle with the Syrians. We've seen several of these battles already. And so there's another battle here taking place with the Syrians. Jehoram is wounded. This is King Jehoram of Israel. King Jehoram of Israel is wounded during this particular battle. He retreats to Jezreel to mend and heal. And while he's there, King Ahaziah of Judah goes to Jezreel to visit with what would essentially be his uncle, I guess. Yeah, that would be his uncle. And so he's going to visit him and to see how he's doing. And that will be the setting in chapter 9 for God to judge both of these men. And so we'll see that in the next chapter. Like I said here, in the end of chapter 8, this is just setting up for us. But as I said at the beginning, all in all, these stories are shining examples of the truth of Scripture. Not only what we read of Paul in 2 Corinthians, but over and over in the Proverbs. I'll just give you one of them. Proverbs 13:20 says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. You go read the book of Proverbs, and you're going to see consistently, reminder after reminder after reminder, of the importance of the relationships we keep. Because like it or not, or think you're above it all, you're not. Your relationships do influence you. And those you choose to keep around you, not that they're going to determine how you live, not that they're going to determine exactly what specific decisions you make, but they will absolutely influence you in one direction or another. And so we have to be very mindful. Like I said, the marriage relationship is the epitome of this. But it's not the only one, right? The people we choose to, and so you don't choose everybody. You don't oftentimes get to choose who your boss is. You don't oftentimes get to choose who your coworkers are, those kinds of things. But the people who you do choose to make a part of your life and allow them to influence you, I cannot overstate the importance of making sure that they are people who you would be glad to follow their influence. And this is important. And so the common drift of people is you're not going to be the one lone person lifting up a group of people spiritually. Typically, again, not to say that this is a blanket statement, but typically, if you're the one lone Christian in a group of non-Christians, what we see happen more often than not is that they bring you down. And again, not to say that it can't happen the other way, but unfortunately, that's what we see happen time and time again. So choose those who you allow to influence you through the lens of Scripture and through the lens of would I like this person to be influencing the decisions that I make in my life. It's important because whether or not you realize it, they will be. And so I think both of these men, both Jehoram and Ahaziah, become really, really great examples of the negative side of that. And so that's important lessons to be seen there. Okay.